Grab your favorite beverage. It's time for the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? It is week 13. This is part one, the Thanksgiving Day special of the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Excited to get one of my OG co-hosts back on the podcast, Adam Natras. Thank you for coming on. Welcome. Happy holidays. How has fantasy been going for you so far this season?
I'll tell you, there's definitely been some ups and downs, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, man, I've had more luck season long than I think I did FanDuel, but it is good to be back. I'm excited. The Thursday slate of football games is one of the best things in all of sports. Yeah, excited to be here talking about it.
There's nothing better than Thanksgiving to me. It's my favorite holiday. You get to eat all day, you get to drink beer all day, and watch football all day. What else could you ask for, right?
On a Thursday.
On a Thursday, hell yeah. Especially, it's even nicer when you get the Friday after off as well, so that's nice. So you mentioned FanDuel. Obviously, we were doing the FanDuel lineup of the week beginning of the season. Unfortunately for me, my work schedule was just kicking my ass all year, and it just got too hard to coordinate when I can get people to come on and whatnot. So we did have to kind of bail on that throughout the season, but I'm glad you're back. I do want to mention our social media handles here, just so you can hit us up if you have any questions or comments, especially about these Thanksgiving Day games. On Twitter, we're at Beers, capital N, Bruisers. You can check us out on our Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast Facebook page as well. So hit us up with any questions, anything you want us to talk about. I'd love to hear everybody's feedback. What we're going to do today, we're going to start off the podcast by going through the best Thanksgiving Day fantasy performers of all time. And
I'm excited for this. This is a good topic you chose.
Yeah, this was fun to go through. I got the idea from Paul last year, who was on the podcast a lot. Miss him a lot. He gave me the idea. We did a Halloween-themed, the scariest fantasy lineup of all time, and it was all the top performers at each position. So I went ahead and I looked up players, and we're going off of a half PPR scoring format where you get 1 point per 25 pass yards, 4 points per touchdown, and that's it made a big difference between quarterbacks especially. So the top performer with that scoring system in mind was Matthew Stafford against, I'm sorry to say it, Adam, your Eagles in 2015. He had 337 pass yards and 5 touchdowns. Do you remember this game, Adam?
Chip. Yeah, unfortunately. But,
the Chip Kelly days?
Yep. It was a rough Thanksgiving for all of us.
Was that one of the games that Mark Sanchez played? I know he played a game against the Cowboys the one year as an Eagles QB. I don't remember who that was against Stafford.
It's kind of hard to shuffle through all of the quarterbacks that they had marched out under the Chip Kelly regime. But it very well may have been Mark Sanchez. I tried to black that one out because it was a very poor performance.
Yeah.
That 3-year span there, we just forget.
Yeah, that was a long time before the Super Bowl year, so I'm sure you guys are over it by now. At least I hope so. And like I said, the scoring system made a big difference for this because Peyton had a 6-touchdown game against the Lions, and I think it was 2005. But he only threw, I think, 236 yards or something. So that made a couple points of a difference between the top QB scorers. Tom Brady also had a really good game on Thanksgiving one year. Another one of the Lions quarterbacks back in the day, but that's quarterback. At running back, a bunch of pretty well-known names here. We got O.J. Simpson versus the Lions in 1976. Had 39.3 fantasy points, 273 rushing yards with 2 touchdowns. back when the juice was still the juice and not killing people and going to jail for all kinds of crazy stuff. And then we had Earl Campbell versus the Cowboys, 37.9 fantasy points, 1979, 195 rush yards with 2 touchdowns. He also caught 6 passes for 34 yards. That use in the pass game kind of pushed him over the top of Barry Sanders, his 1997 game against the Bears when he had 36.5 fantasy points with 167 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns. He caught 2 balls for 8 yards. So those are the 2 running backs. Obviously, 3 Hall of Famers, 3 really good players. Adam, you were just mentioning the NFL Network was replaying that Earl Campbell game against the Cowboys one of the past nights.
Oh, I'll tell you what, when you watch that game, it looks like a grown man playing amongst, and again, as an Eagles fan, I treasured this game watching. It looks like he's playing against the cheerleaders of a youth football team.
Oh, yeah.
He's shedding. It's amazing to watch. If you ever get a chance, you have to watch that game and Earl Campbell's highlights.
Okay.
Amazing.
So at wide receiver, some surprising names here. Sterling Sharp had 40.7 fantasy points versus the Cowboys. I think it was 1996 or something like this, 97, late 90s. 9 catches on 122 receiving yards with 4 touchdowns. And then someone that I'm sure none of us have heard of, unless you're a fan of the history of the NFL, Jim Benton versus the Lions in 1945. 41.3 fantasy points, 10 catches, 303 yards with a touchdown. It was the first 300-yard wide receiver he was in the NFL. Crazy game back in 1945. And then at flex, another name I'm sure not many people have heard of, Ernie Nevers against the Bears.
The Bears are who we thought they were.
This was in 1929. It was the Chicago Cardinals versus the Chicago Bears, and he had 6 touchdowns, and he kicked 4 extra points. It's the most points ever scored in a game. The record still stands. The headline of the Chicago Tribune or whatever the paper was, it said Bears 6, Nevers 40, and that's not even counting his yardage because I guess they didn't keep track of yardage back in 1929. I could not find how many rushing yards he had. All I could find was how many touchdowns he scored. So
let me give you a fun fact about that Bears team that lost to him.
Okay.
So that team was coached by none other than what is considered to be the founding father of the NFL, and George Halas, head coach of the Bears at that time. That team also featured a player that most people don't even consider real, and actually did in fact crack the wall at Wrigley Field, which was covered by the ivy for about 100 years or so. But Bronco Nagurski was the fullback of that Bears.
Bronco Nagurski.
And that man ran headfirst into that brick wall and cracked it. How about that?
That's awesome, dude. Yeah, that's an awesome name. That's great. So that is our running backs, wide receivers, our flex, Ernie Nevers, and our quarterback. At tight end, you had Kellen Winslow II versus the Broncos in 2008.
What a name.
28.1 fantasy points. He had 10 catches for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns. Kind of a shame that he's kind of defiled his family name, but he was a hell of a player.
Yeah, talk about a guy that couldn't get out of his own way.
Right. And then at DST, so the best defensive performance I could find, I'm sure there's been other ones, but it was kind of hard to find this information, actually. It was the Detroit Lions versus the Green Bay Packers in 1962. That was against the
Vince Lombardi
Packers. Yep, they sacked Bart Starr 10 times, 2 interceptions, one by Dick Night Train Lane, one by Dick LeBeau. Dick Night Train Lane, I think he still holds the record for most interceptions in a single season with 14,
yep.
And that was in a 12-game regular season, which is absolutely insane. Awesome name. Apparently he was terrified of flying, so he took the night train to every game, which is awesome. And then Dick LeBeau, who if you're a guy our age, you remember him as the defensive coordinator of the vaunted Steelers defense in the mid to late 2000s, with Troy Polamalu and all those guys. So So yeah, that was the top Thanksgiving Day fantasy performers. I didn't bother looking up kickers because who cares, right?
It must get hard looking those stats up around Detroit. I wish for once the NFL would stop putting Detroit and Dallas on Thanksgiving. Like anybody actually cares about that specific tradition.
I don't know. It's cool that we know at least two of the teams that are going to be playing every year.
No, you know what? Watching Dallas is never fun. It's never fun. I mean, listen, even the lowly Detroit Lions I prefer to it, but give us a shakeup. Let's let everybody play.
Well, at least as an Eagles fan, like the Eagles have been in a lot of these Thanksgiving Day games, being in the same division as the Cowboys, so that's got to be fun.
When that happens, it is fun. But other than that, it's always still the Cowboys and Lions. I don't get it.
Just be happy that you're not a Jets fan and your lasting Thanksgiving football memory is the butt fumble. So
no, but we took your quarterback, so call it even.
Yeah, thanks. So thanks a lot. So we are going to go through the 3 Thanksgiving Day games. We're going to go through all the players. We're going to dissect their target shares and their touch distributions and their catch percentages and all that fun stuff. But we're also going to look at the FanDuel spreads and the over-unders for each game. And the reason why is because last week I had myself one hell of a day gambling on football. I've been saying for the past couple of weeks about, certain team over-unders, looking at really bad offenses versus really good defenses and seeing what FanDuel has those individual team over-unders set at. And so I had hit on 4 tickets, but 3 of them that I'm going to tell you about. So one of them, it was a $10 ticket, paid $131. I had the away team under 17, Broncos at the Bills. So that's the Broncos under 17 points. That hit. The Bills, a West Coast team coming east, playing at 1 o'clock. Bills had a really good defense. They still do. Broncos coming in with their quarterback, Allen, one of those Allens, and they haven't been playing well, and I took them under 17, and it hit. The other one was the Steelers at the Bengals. I had the home team under 15.5. Bengals only put up 10 points on that really good Steelers defense. I had the Ravens at the Rams, home team under 22. The Rams only put up 6 points. The Ravens defense has gotten a hell of a lot better since the trade for Marcus Peters and since they got Jimmy Smith back. We saw last night just how good that defense has gotten. And then I also had the Dallas and the New England total under 45 points. I think that ended at like 32 or something. So there's opportunities out there to make some money, man. You gotta, you just gotta be willing to dish out a little bit of cash. So I've also been talking a lot about anytime touchdown scores. So the one of them that I had, I did just the 49ers and the Packers game. I took Devontae Adams, George Kittle, and Raheem Mostert. With Breida out, I figured Mostert was a solid play, especially because he was plus 200 something, I think. Devontae Adams, solid wide receiver, one of the best in the league. And George Kittle going up against a defense that was not very good against tight ends. And all 3 of them scored. That was another $10 ticket. That hit for $232. And then I did a big one that was just tight ends. So kind of like what I did with George Kittle against the Packers, I looked at the list of teams that give up the most fantasy points to tight ends, and specifically teams that give up a lot of touchdowns to tight ends. And the Raiders, the Seahawks, and the Browns were 3 of the top, I think, 6 or 7. And I looked at the 3 teams playing them. So the Jets at the Raiders, we've seen Ryan Griffin really come on as of late, scored a couple touchdowns over the past couple games. It seems like Sam Darnold really likes him.
4 games, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, man. So he scored for me. I had Zach Ertz against the Seahawks. Seahawks give up, I think, either the 3rd or 4th most fantasy points to tight ends, with the Eagles' receiving core being what it was and with Zach Ertz being what he is. I figured there's probably no better tight end to bet on scoring this week than Zach Ertz against the Seahawks. And it came down to the last drive of the game. He scored for me. Zach Ertz has been one of my favorite players over these past couple of years because I've had him in a lot of leagues, and he seems to always come through in the clutch for me.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you get targeted like a wide receiver.
Right.
I mean, it's a good bet. Man, that's a good weekend you had there.
And then, so the third one of that ticket, right, was Mike Gesicki versus the
Ooh.
Browns.
Penn State alumnus, huh?
So he was plus 400. And the Browns, again, I think they were top 5 in fantasy points allowed to 2 tight ends. With Preston Williams going down for the Dolphins and with the running situation being what it is there, I figured Gesicki's going to see some opportunities in the passing game. And he as well scored a touchdown. So that was another $10 ticket, and this one paid out $553.
Ooh. That sounds. I'm sure anytime you take a Miami player, that was a good choice.
Yeah, man. So that alone, that was about $800 or $900. I had another one that was like a five team parlay, but that was a couple teams money lines, and I think I had Tevin Coleman as an anytime TD scorer on that ticket, and he also scored. So I did pretty well, and I think it was really easy putting it together, man. I just looked at teams that are not good against specific positions, and I looked at the teams that are playing those defenses and what guys that I thought had the best chance of scoring, and it paid off. So I'm going to take that $900 and I don't know, I'm going to throw it in the bank and save it for a rainy day, I guess.
So all I heard you say was you were doubling down on Thanksgiving. All right, that's good.
Yeah, you could say that. All right, so we have here the 3 Thanksgiving Day games. We're going to start with the Bills at the Cowboys. Bills getting 6.5 against the Cowboys on the road. It's a 45.5 point over-under as of right now. So the first thing I want to talk about, the Bills ran all over, who'd they play? The Broncos defense last week, 244 team rushing yards. Singletary with his first 100-plus rush yard game. 7 of the first 15 plays were runs with Devin Singletary. You know, we talk a lot about the first 15, and half of those plays went to Singletary for about 30 yards, so he was productive early in the game. Frank Gore had 9 of his 15 carries in the fourth quarter, 12 of the 15 in the second half altogether. So he was used as the second half run the clock guy, and this is the second week in a row now that Singletary's gotten the majority of the carries, and Gore has kind of been used as the the kill the clock guy. Now Gore did have a goal line carry in the second quarter, which it would be nice to see. It would be nice to see that go to Singletary, but I'll take 21 carries any day. So he also passed Barry Sanders for third on all-time rushing list, which is cool, but in fantasy, who cares? Singletary is still the man, if you ask me. He had 3 games this year with 6 targets, and I think this is one of the games that the Bills try and get him a little more involved in the passing game. The Cowboys allow the 8th most receptions and receiving yards to running backs so far this season. So this is definitely a good game to be playing Devin Singletary in any format, especially in PPR leagues. Cole Beasley and John Brown last week both scored. Both have been pretty damn consistent. John Brown with double-digit fantasy point games in 7 of the 11 games this season. No fewer than 7.5 fantasy points all year. But the Cowboys have been pretty good against wide receivers. They give up the 5th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. I don't think it really matters, though. I'm still playing John Brown because of his consistency. And I think I'm going to play Cole Beasley as well. And you know why, Adam?
Why is that? Because he gets at least 10 points every game for most points?
No,
I like
it's because of the revenge factor. He's playing the Cowboys. He spent the first half of his career there, and yeah, he's feeling the revenge, baby. So I think he can play either of them this week, and it should be a good game. I'm excited about this one for sure. One other thing about Josh Allen here. So Cowboys versus quarterbacks that pose a threat in the running game. I went back and I looked at all the quarterbacks that the Cowboys have faced. It's pretty much only been Taysom Hill, Carson Wentz, Daniel Jones, and Jeff Driscoll, who we'll talk about in the next game. But Taysom Hill had 16 yards, Carson Wentz had 12 yards, whatever. The big ones that killed him were Daniel Jones for 54 yards and Jeff Driscoll for 51 yards. And none of them pose as much of a threat running the ball as Josh Allen. So he should have another game with his normal 35 to 40 rushing yards per game. He's got back-to-back 56 rushing yard games now on the season, so nice little safe floor for him. We see Lamar Jackson, how much value he adds to his game with his rushing, and Josh Allen does the same. He's killing it this year running the ball. Is there anybody on the Bills that you think we should spend a little more time talking about, Adam?
I think you covered it quite well, to be honest. And in fact, just to your point, and I would like to make this statement, I am in fact starting Josh Allen, John Brown, and Cole Beasley.
Oh, nice.
They will all be starting on my team. I actually think you can start Josh Allen pretty much against anybody, to your point. With his legs, he's had pretty good games, maybe other than the New England game, across the board.
Yeah, man. In pretty much all of my leagues, except for I think 2 of them, I have Lamar Jackson. I drafted him in every place that I could. And the one league that I wasn't able to draft him, I waited too long. It's a full point PPR league. I did the 0 RB, and I chickened out on drafting Patrick Mahomes. And then I waited too long, and luckily at the end of the draft, Josh Allen was available, so I picked him up, and I've just been using him. He's been my starting quarterback all year long. Last week 2 weeks ago he had the big 2 rushing touchdown game, and yeah, man, he's been great for me. I think I'm 8-4 in that league, so I'm looking pretty good to make the playoffs, and it's because honestly Josh Allen has kind of kept me afloat. I think he's averaged like 20 points a game, which is not a lot, but it's great. It's a great floor for a guy that I basically got with my last pick in the draft. All right, so let's go over to the Cowboys. So no surprise, Dak had his worst game of the year versus Bill Belichick. He had his lowest completion percentage, lowest passer rating, and fewest passing yards on the season. Did not throw a touchdown, threw an interception. Kind of surprising to me, actually. He still leads the league in passing after that performance, which is pretty amazing, really. Amari Cooper got Stephon Gilmore. I don't know if they have a phrase for that yet, but no catches on only 2 targets. The Patriots made Dak throw the ball around to everybody else. 6 different guys with at least 4 targets last week. Only 2 other games this year that Dak targeted even 5 different players with at least 4 targets, and that was against the Jets and the Vikings. Coincidentally, they lost both of those games, so it seems like if you can make the Cowboys distribute the ball and not let them just funnel targets to Amari Cooper, you can beat this. You can beat this offense. This week,
all I'm going to say with Dak, real quick,
go ahead,
is that if you were to look deeply at the Cowboys' schedule, he hasn't really played many good defenses, and when he does, he's been pedestrian. So we'll see how they fare the second half of their schedule, but.
Yeah, the second half
games have been,
The second half has definitely been, or is going to be, tougher for him than the first half. But he has been putting up the numbers, man. You can't deny it.
Against subpar defenses is all I'm saying. We'll see.
Right.
We'll see how he does against a little bit better of a defense.
Yeah, and this week it doesn't get any easier. They play one of the best lockdown corners in Tre'Davious White, so I'm not expecting a good game for Amari Cooper, and thus I'm not expecting a good game for Dak Prescott either. I think Zeke's going to get his 20 carries a game like he always does. He should be totally fine. The Bills' run defense has got beaten up a little bit, especially by your Eagles a couple weeks ago. So I think Zeke will be totally fine. It remains to be seen what these other 2 wide receivers do for the Cowboys. Randall Cobb had a pretty good game last week, 4 catches on 7 targets for 86 yards. Michael Gallup caught 4 of his 6 targets for 55 yards. So, we'll see if they can scrap out a win with those guys, considering Amari Cooper's probably going to get taken away again by Tre'Davious White.
Let's hope so. Let's hope that we can have a nice midday Dallas loss.
You Eagle fans, you guys are crazy. I get it, though. I totally get it. All right, next game. Oh, actually, real quick. So over under 45.5. How you feeling about that?
I think it's going to be a slug out. I think it could be under. I think you're just going to see the ball running, the clock running. I don't necessarily think there's going to be a lot of throwing going on.
Okay, so you like the under in that game?
I do.
All right, and then are you taking the Bills plus 6.5 or Cowboys minus 6.5?
Oh, that's a tough one.
right?
I mean, it's unfortunately it's in Dallas, and I'm gonna still go with the Bills. I'm taking the Bills. I mean, I think that the Bills have been a really good team.
Yeah, man, 6.5 points with that defense. I think they can keep the game close enough where 6.5 points should help you cover. So I'm going to take that, and I agree. I think I'm going to take the under in that game as well. All right, moving on to the Bears at the Lions. So we got we got the Bears going over to Detroit to play the Lions, the home of the Motor City Madman, my boy Teddy Nugent. So the Bears, David Montgomery rushed for only 60 yards on 17 attempts when they played in Week 10. The Lions are one of the worst run defenses in football, so it was definitely discouraging to see him struggle versus the bad Lions defense. He had only 53 rushing yards on 27 attempts in the last 2 games, so he's definitely kind of fallen off. Tariq Cohen was the more productive running back last week and the last game between these two teams. Cohen with a touchdown in Week 10 versus the Lions, and he had 9 targets last week, his most targets since Week 7. The Lions allow the third most receiving yards to running backs, so I think Tariq Cohen should have the better game between these two. Allen Robinson with only his third double-digit target game and his second 100-plus yard receiving game last week. Robinson played well versus the who did they play? Versus the Giants. Let's see here. Yeah, the quarterback still kind of sucks, but I mean, hey, targets and talent equals fantasy points, right? So he's worth playing to me, at least as a flex in PPR leagues. If he's going to get the targets, and it's like I said, it's against the bad Lions defense. They also give up. Actually, they don't rank as far as fantasy points allowed against wide receivers, but they do give up the 8th most to quarterbacks. And as we know, quarterbacks and wide receivers are very much correlated. So should be a good game for Allen Robinson, for Tariq Cohen, and I'm not sure about anybody else on the Bears defense. Are you stuck playing anybody like Taylor Gabriel?
No, thank God.
Right.
I have no investment in the Bears offense at all. That was done deliberately. I'm very happy with that choice. Way too inconsistent for my taste.
Yeah, I got David Montgomery in one league that he fell to me, and I was in a position where I needed another running back, so I drafted him, and he's been very up and down so far for sure for me. He's kind of killing me. And so this is Bears minus 2.5 against the Lions, and it's a 38.5 point over-under. I think I'm going to take...
Khalil Mack really does put you have to think about it twice, right?
Yeah, I think I would have to go with the under in that game plus, and I think I'm going to take the Lions getting 2.5 points. Although, yeah, I mean, Khalil Mack does make me nervous for sure. But I mean, the Bears' offense has just looked so bad, dude.
So bad, and honestly, without Akeem Hicks, their run defense hasn't been that good either.
Right.
So I actually think that the over could hit on that game.
Okay. All right. So we are going to disagree on the over-under. So with Stafford likely to miss Thursday game, most likely it's going to be Jeff Driscoll again. Last week he was sacked 6 times, 11 sacks in 3 games. It's not good, and he threw 3 interceptions as well. He did not look very good, but he has shown an ability to pad his floor with his rushing, kind of like we were talking about with Josh Allen. 63 rushing yards last week, 50 and a touchdown the week before against Dallas, and then 37 rushing yards in Week 10 at the Bears in his first start as a Lion. And I went and I looked back at the rushing yards allowed to quarterbacks by the Bears. They've played 7 quarterbacks that I don't consider to be a threat rushing the ball, and that's Joe Flacco, Case Keenum, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, Phillip Rivers, Teddy Bridgewater, and Jared Goff. However, they have played 5 quarterbacks who are a threat, and that's Rodgers, if you still consider him to be a threat with his legs, Taysom Hill, Carson Wentz, Daniel Jones, and Jeff Driscoll. So Taysom Hill, Daniel Jones, and Jeff Driscoll account for 65% of the rushing yards allowed to quarterbacks by the Bears. So Driscoll should be able to pick up another 4 or 5 extra points running the ball. I'm not telling you that you should go out and play him, but I do think that he will be able to continue that streak of giving us a little extra pad in the floor of his fantasy production.
He does have a hamstring injury. That's the only it was on the report today. The only lingering thing there that makes me a little nervous with the over. I do want to put that in there.
Okay, yeah, all right. So that's definitely something to keep in mind if
right.
if it comes out that they're going to be rolling with whoever the third string quarterback is, then I'm definitely taking the under in that game.
Yeah, yep. Take it now.
Yeah. So he in that game he threw the ball 46 times against the Bears the last time they played. They ran the ball 22 times with J.D. McKissick, Ty Johnson, and Paul Perkins. And they targeted the running backs 9 times in that game. 7 of them went to J.D. McKissick. I don't think we'll see a heavy pass game again this time around because I think the Lions found their lead back for the rest of the year. Bo Scarborough, he's looked great, man. 14 carries for 55 yards and a touchdown in Week 11 at Dallas in a revenge game for him. And then he followed it up with 18 carries and 2 yards short of 100 yards last week against Washington. I think he's earned the starting role. He's averaged about 4 yards per carry in the Week 11 and then 5.5 yards last week. So the Lions running backs have averaged 3 yards per carry versus the Bears defense in that Week 10 matchup. I think Bo can do way better than that. So I'm going to play Bo this week if you have him. I think we talked about
I am also playing Bo this week,
okay.
as you are alluding to. I'm starting him over Carlos Hyde potentially. I know you'll get into that game, the Houston and New England game, later in the week, but I think that with Akeem Hicks out and if Jeff Driscoll's hamstring's a little sore, like Bo might see his way to 20, 25 touches.
Yeah.
So
I wouldn't be
good
surprised
chance for 100 yards, right? Let's get our man a 100-yard game.
Let's do it. Let's get Bo 100 yards. The Bears' run defense has held Barkley to 60 yards on 17 attempts last week, and in Week 4 they held Dalvin Cook to 35 yards on 14 attempts. And then in week, if I could read my chicken scratch here, I think it's 8, they kept the Chargers duo of running backs, Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler, to under 35 total rushing yards combined. So those were the good Bears defensive performances. They've also gotten beat up in the run game. So you look at Week 5 against Oakland, they gave up 123 yards and 2 touchdowns to Josh Jacobs. In Week 7 against New Orleans, without Alvin Kamara, they let Latavius Murray run for 119 yards and 2 touchdowns. Against the Philadelphia Eagles, your boys, in Week 9, Jordan Howard had 82 rushing yards and a touchdown. And then in Week 11 against the Rams, Gurley with 97 yards and a touchdown on 25 carries, which was his first game with over 19 touches. So
the teams that committed to the run against them saw success.
Exactly.
The teams that only half committed, it didn't work.
Right. So, what did the Rams see in the Bears defense? Why did they wait until that Bears game to give him 25 carries? They must have saw something. So, yeah, man, if I had Bo on any of my teams, I wouldn't be nervous about starting him in my leagues at all. So good luck to you and your fellow Bo Scarborough owners. As far as the Lions wide receivers, since the quarterback change, Marvin Jones has had 22 targets and Kenny Golladay has had 18. Because of Marvin Jones' 11-target game last week, which he only caught 5 of those 11 targets for 46 yards. Not very good. Jeff Driscoll missed him on a handful of deep targets, which has kind of been Marvin Jones' thing. In Week 10, when these two teams played, Driscoll targeted Amendola and T.J. Hawkinson 14 times between the two of them. They each only caught half of their targets, but I'm guessing attacking the middle of the field was part of the game plan for the Lions. And if you look, the Bears are allowing the 6th most fantasy points to tight ends as of right now. So I know Hawkinson was questionable going into last week's game. He crept up on the injury report late Saturday night. He only saw, 2 targets, didn't catch either of them last week. So if he gets healthier, I think he may be somebody to pay attention to. But he's just been so incredibly inconsistent, so I don't know if you can trust him either. So that does it for the Bears and the Lions. Adam, you got anything you want to add to that game?
No, I think we covered it pretty well.
Word. All right. The next and the final game is the Saints at the Falcons. Saints minus 6.5. It's a 48.5 point over-under right now. This is another divisional rematch here on Thursday on Thanksgiving. We got the what was it? The Bears and the Lions was the other division game, and this is the fourth straight division game for the Saints, which is kind of ridiculous. How did the schedule makers give these guys 4 straight division games in the middle of the season?
Who knows? What they must have just not been paying attention.
Yeah, it's really weird, man.
This is the best game of the day, too.
Yeah, hopefully.
Right?
So Michael Thomas with his 6th double-digit catch game this season last week. He doesn't care whether it's a division game or not. He's going to eat you up. This was against the Panthers. He's played every game this year, and all but 2 of them he has double-digit targets, including his 13-catch, 152-yard game versus the Atlanta Falcons in Week 10. He's going to be great again. I would set him as my MVP in those single-game FanDuel contests. I think he's going to do absolutely awesome things. He always does.
6 games with over double-digit targets or catches.
I know, it's ridiculous.
It's insane. He's a monster.
Another guy that has kind of come on lately, Jared Cook, 4 of his last 5 games with a touchdown. The only game without a touchdown over those 5 games was against the Atlanta Falcons. But he was very involved in that game, 70% snap count. He had his second highest, that was the second highest snap count for him on the season. And then he had a 22% target share in that game, which is awesome as well. Anytime you're seeing 22% of Drew Brees' targets, you should have a pretty good game. And the Falcons rank in the middle of the pack versus tight end, so Jared Cook should be a decent play again this week. So I would get him in my lineups as well, especially on FanDuel, because he's probably one of the cheaper tight end options anyway. So like I said, when they played in Week 10, the Saints only ran the ball 10 times for 52 yards, and 16 of those 52 yards came from Taysom Hill and Teddy Ginn. So these running backs did not do very well in that game. It was Kamara's first game back after missing 2 games, which is why he only had 4 carries in that game. And that was the first regular season game that the Saints were held to under 50 rushing yards since Week 1 of 2018. So I don't think that's going to happen again. I think Kamara is going to be just fine. Kamara actually, he's had his workload kind of shift a bit since his return from injury. He's averaged 5 less carries in the 3 games since his return compared to the first 6 games of the season. But he's seen 3.5 more targets per game over that stretch as well. So he's getting the same amount of touches. He's just getting involved in the pass game more, which those are actually more valuable touches anyway, so that's a good thing. He just hasn't seen the end zone as much as last year. He's only got 2 touchdowns on the season. He had 14 through 9 games last year, which is pretty ridiculous. And Alvin Kamara with 288 yards combined in the 2 games versus Atlanta last year. No touchdowns in those 2 games, so you got to figure he's due for a touchdown against the Falcons in this game for sure.
Yeah. And don't forget, Latavius has, 4 touchdowns in 5 games or something like that?
Yeah, man, he's been doing great.
He's fool's gold, though. The amount of touches he gets just aren't enough. But
yeah, it's just, with
he gets the goal line.
The goal line carries, and, with Alvin Kamara's role shifting more towards the pass game, he's gotten a little bit more carries throughout the past couple games. And like I said, on that offense, and any touch on that offense is incrementally more valuable than the majority of any other team's touches, just because of how awesome that offense is. So
true.
I have Latavius in a couple leagues. He's just been a bench player for me, except for the couple weeks that Kamara was out, and
that was great.
Yeah, man,
I had him for that too.
He was kind of like a week winner for me in those 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he did
monster
great.
games.
All right, so for the Falcons here, the Saints' defense has been good against running backs this season. 4th fewest fantasy points allowed to running backs, and the Falcons have really struggled running the ball all season, especially over the last 2 games without Devontae Freeman. They rank second to last in rushing behind only the Miami Dolphins, which is pretty pathetic. And the duo of Brian Hill and Quadre Allison, if I'm saying it right, have rushed for only 75 yards on 36 attempts in the last 2 weeks combined. I don't expect the Falcons' run game to get going on this Thursday night. So it should be another heavy pass attempt game for Matt Ryan, who's averaging about 40 pass attempts per game. Looking at the receivers, Julio, he left the game last week, but he was able to return after I think he got an injection in his shoulder. He was questionable with he is still questionable with the shoulder injury. He didn't practice on Monday. I didn't see whether he practiced today on Tuesday.
No, he didn't.
He didn't. So yeah, man, that's pretty scary. I don't think these teams are going to practice tomorrow, with it being most likely the travel day, and then Thursday afternoon. This one is a little different because it's Thursday night, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. He's only 3 games since 2014 he's missed, which is crazy considering all the little injuries that he's had. So I expect him to play if he's feeling up to it, but we'll have to wait and see. If he didn't practice Monday or Tuesday, that's not good. But he's always had this doesn't score a touchdown thing about him, but if he's active, I'm playing him no matter what. But if Julio doesn't play, it should be another big target game for Calvin Ridley. He saw 14 targets last week, only caught 6 of them, which is no good, but targets are targets. And if Julio doesn't play, you got to figure he's going to see at least 15, 16. And another
he gets
guy,
a lot of the end zone targets.
Yeah, man.
That Julio does not get somehow.
With Julio gone and with Austin Hooper gone, who's been one of the most heavily used tight ends in the red zone, yeah, you got to figure that Calvin Ridley's going to see almost all of the red zone opportunities. Another guy here, Russell Gage, would also become a very interesting play, especially in FanDuel. He caught 8 of 10 targets for 76 yards last week. If there's no Julio Jones, I think he becomes kind of a must-start in FanDuel. He's dirt cheap right now, $5,400 for a guy that should see plenty of targets in a game that Vegas thinks will be the second highest scoring game of the week. They have the over-under, like I said, at 48.5. I bet the over, which was 51 when these two teams played in week 10. It didn't hit, but if Julio Jones doesn't play, I think I'm going to take the under. If he does play, I'll take the over. And honestly, I think Saints minus 6.5. Usually, anytime I see a spread that high, I kind of stay away from it. But I think the Saints can win by at least 1 touchdown pretty easily. So I'm going to take the Saints minus 6.5. And like I said, I'll take the under if Julio doesn't play, and if he does, then I'll take the over.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that right there. If he does play, it's going to be a shootout. It could be a shootout either way, though. I mean, especially because they can't run the football to save their life.
Yeah, and apparently I think Marshawn Lattimore has missed either the past 2 or 3 games. So yeah, I mean, if their best corner's not out there, then you got to figure that
they can score 100 points.
Maybe not 100.
Yeah, they've combined.
Yeah. So yeah, that's gonna do it for the Thanksgiving Day games here on the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and Adam, thanks for joining us for this special episode. I hope everything goes well for you, and I hope you're getting into the playoffs and all your fantasy leagues this year. So so thanks again for joining. Make sure we got to get you back on another episode. And so make sure you tune in to part 2 and 3 of this week's episode. We're going to do the NFC home games in part 2, and then we'll do the AFC home games in part 3. And like I said, hit us up on Facebook and on Twitter if you want us to spend some time talking about any specific players. Thanks again for tuning in, and as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. For more episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Beers and Bruisers is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach TV, or your favorite podcast service. Beers and Bruisers is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com. or download the free HC Universal Network app today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gaming operates a national problem gambling helpline network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to drink responsibly and always look for your man downfield.